Hello, and welcome to my presentation for Breastfeeding Beyond Babyhood, which is all about how to wean from breastfeeding with the help of a picture book. A little bit about me before we get started. So I'm a mum to two boys. One has just turned 5 and one is now 14 months. Breastfed both of them, but with the first one, the start of breastfeeding was particularly difficult. He was born normally, but then had to go into intensive care pretty much straight away. I didn't get to hold him. I didn't get to do any kind of skin to skin or spend any time with him. And although I'd researched breastfeeding extensively before the birth, everything that I thought I needed to do, skin to skin and spending lots of time with the baby, getting them to latch on as soon as possible, went completely out the window. I knew enough to protect and preserve my milk supply, so I was pumping as much as I could and trying to feed him as much as I could as well, but he was really struggling to latch on. So initially it was really difficult. And then I would never have imagined that 2.5 years later, we were still going. I was still feeding him through mastitis and nursing strikes and biting injuries and all of that kind of thing, everything that can happen in a breastfeeding journey. All of that happened, yet still for me, one of the hardest things about breastfeeding was stopping. And I just found that there was loads of support to begin with. There were people I could turn to ask for help, people who'd come and watch me feed and check positioning and things like that. But when it came to actually wanting to wean, I just felt completely on my own. And luckily I had friends who were in a similar position, but it was really just finding out through research and what I could see on the internet and what worked best and what felt right to me about weaning as well, because I think it is so personal, and that's really how I ended up on the journey to where I am today. The 14-month-old, it's completely different. He was born in a car outside the hospital at a very quick birth, but aside from that, breastfeeding has been easy in comparison, hardly any issues at all, and it just goes to show how breastfeeding can be so different, and two completely different journeys with very different children as well. A little bit more about me, just so you've got a bit of background. I'm an assistant head teacher in an international school in Switzerland. I teach English. Originally from the UK, so that's why the accent might be a little bit different to everyone else speaking at this conference. Because of some of the experiences that I've had, and because of the fact that I'm now really passionate about helping and empowering mums to breastfeed for as long or as little as they want to, I'm training as a lactation counsellor with Childbirth International. And I would really like weaning from breastfeeding at whatever stage you're at to be a specialism of when I eventually end up being able to offer more specialised support. At the moment, I'm the founder of @the Series on Instagram, which is a space for women who particularly are feeding past babyhood and would like to also be thinking perhaps about weaning. So it's a safe space to come and have a look at resources and to maybe chat with other people who are in similar situations as well. And I'm also the author of A Big Change for Seb, which is a weaning from breastfeeding picture book. And this is available from my website, www.saidtheseries.com, or Amazon as well. So today's talk is going to be focusing on how picture books can help you with the weaning process. Also a few weaning strategies to use alongside a book, because as you'll see, it's not just as simple as getting them to read a book, unfortunately. And a little bit about my book, A Big Change for Seb, and how it came to be in existence. So when can picture books work? So as I said, they are not a magical solution. It's not something that you're just going to buy off Amazon and then be like, yeah, here we go, we're all done now. They know what we're doing, and we can just stop. When you are breastfeeding past babyhood, you might know it is breastfeeding so tied up with many other things. It's not just a case of feeding your baby, and it's not just about nutrition anymore. Although as a baby you would be feeding maybe for comfort as well, but it becomes much, much more about that connection with you. And it can also be a little bit about control in your relationship as well. If they ask for a feed and you give it to them, then they're feeling that connection, they're feeling that they can have their needs met. So it can be emotional as well as just the logistics of giving up breastfeeding and stopping. So picture books can be really helpful for that. They can be really useful as a prompt in terms of showing your child what you are going to do, giving you a frame of reference, giving them a frame of reference for what's about to happen, what might be coming up. And it helps that weaning process to become a little bit less abstract for them and a bit less confusing, because this is something that they've been doing their whole lives. They need to be kind of thinking about what it might look like when they're not doing that anymore, and be reassured about that as well. And it also helps because children, as we know, like to copy everything, which is why we maybe have to watch what we're talking about when they get to speaking age. But it's really useful for that because it actually provides them with a role model. It might give them characters that they can look up to and think about and see how they are navigating this big thing in their life as well. I'm also really passionate about the media that we consume, whether that be picture books or TV programs, cartoons, the role of media in normalizing breastfeeding, in representing breastfeeding, in providing a platform, and just for children to be aware that, you know, we don't just feed babies with bottles. And I think it can be really powerful for a child to see their own way of feeding be represented in a picture book. So although A Big Change for Seb is about weaning, it also features breastfeeding just as something that's totally natural and totally normal within the narrative as well. When a child is around 18 months, this is the time when we find that they're a little bit more open to maybe more meaningful communication. So it's often why weaning from night feeds is recommended around this age, because they can understand a little bit more and you can start to communicate with them more on a level about, you know, why you might be doing something, or what, maybe not why, but what is going to be happening, and the fact that you are not going to be doing something. Setting limits, putting boundaries in, it can be much easier at this age because they're a bit more aware, they're a bit more able to communicate with you as well. So will it work for you? I don't know. It might do, it might not. As I said, this book, A Big Change for Seb, is also just a nice story in its own right, and that was one of the reasons why I wanted to create a narrative that was just a story that children might warm to. The feedback on the book so far is that parents and children just really enjoy it. They really like the illustrations. They really like the narrative, which is basically about a little boy becoming more independent, not wanting to go down the big slide to begin with, and then eventually managing to make it. And that kind of ties in with giving up his milk. So you know your child best. Do they respond to books? If it's a big no, then perhaps a picture book is not for you and not for them. But if they do really like reading with you, if you find that you can read a book and you can talk to them about it, then maybe it's something that you could try. It's also very dependent, I guess, about which aspect of weaning you want to focus on. If you've already cut down in the day, but you're really wanting to focus on night feeds, for example, there are books out there that just focus on night weaning. Mine doesn't do that. It's a bit more holistic. But you'll find there are quite a few books out there that focus on weaning. Some of them are much more celebratory, so it's more about coming to the end of a journey and then celebrating it. So if you are interested in picture books, it's worth having a look around and seeing what's out there that might appeal. One of the things that I was really keen to do was create something that looks engaging. So when I was working with the illustrator, I was really keen on colours and just making a little character, Seb, who does normal day-to-day things, just making it look a little bit interesting and engaging for kids. So have a look around. You might find something that really appeals that you can go for. One of the other things I think about weaning at this age is that it's not just emotional for your child, it's emotional for you as well. And it's something that you might need to be a little bit aware of, because sometimes I think we can hold ourselves back from doing it because we get emotional about it. We think it's too early, or we feel guilty, or because we've been so used to breastfeeding on demand and responsively that we find it really, really difficult to put boundaries in. Sometimes it can be really helpful to celebrate your breastfeeding journey, and maybe a picture book can be part of that. It's something that you can keep forever as a keepsake of the time that you breastfed. And it's also why I have loads of posts on my Instagram about the end of breastfeeding and things that you can do to help just emotionally with that as well. So how do you actually use a picture book? I think they're great if you use them and talk about them and reference them with your child, even when you're not in the moment of reading it. So you can read the story with them, you can let them flick through it on their own, and then you can talk about it maybe as you're doing something else. Oh, remember what happened to Seb in the book? Do you remember when he was doing this with mummy? Oh, do you remember when he was having his spaghetti? What do you want for tea tonight? Oh, you're going to have spaghetti, just like Seb in the story. What would you like to play with? Oh, Seb was playing with his train set in the book, wasn't he? So you can keep referencing the character and dropping him into conversation. And then you can also be talking about the weaning at the same time. So if you decide that you'd like to put in a boundary over where you where you breastfeed, which is what Seb ends up doing in the book, or Seb's mum ends up doing in the book. She decides she doesn't want to feed him outside of the house anymore. They're only going to feed inside their house. So you might be able to say, oh, remember in the story, Seb stops breastfeeding when they're out, or Seb doesn't have milk outside the house anymore. We're going to do that as well. So from tomorrow, we're not going to have milk outside the house. We're only going to have milk when we're at home. So this is an easy way then to take the pressure off you. Your child is able to process because they've seen it happen to the character, and it helps them to understand that a little bit more easily. It's also a really great way to open up lines of communication. So if you think your child might be a little bit worried or a little bit anxious about not having access to milk anymore, you can talk to them about it as you're reading. And as I said about the book, I think it doesn't... It is a narrative around breastfeeding, but it's other things as well. And there's so many options for you to talk about things that might be worrying them, or they might have questions about as well. I also find that sometimes children, if they're older, perhaps over 2, can also make suggestions for themselves about how they would like things to be. So, for example, if you're finding it difficult to think about a new bedtime routine or how you're going to get them to go to sleep without breastfeeding, actually asking them, what would you like instead of milk to help you get to sleep? Or what would you like me to do? Or how would you like our evenings to work? Often you can get their buy-in, you can get them to cooperate much more easily if it's them making the decisions. Giving them a choice about things can also be really useful. And it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to not be about this thing that's happening. Giving them a little bit of control can often be really, really helpful. So opening up the lines of communication, using the book initially, and then thinking about your own relationship with breastfeeding and your child and how that might figure out as well. So what is a big change for Seb all about? As I said, it's something that I really wanted to do to help other women because of the weaning situation that I faced. Found it so difficult. And from the age of 2, I really wanted to try and cut down. My son was heavily into breastfeeding to the point that I was getting a little bit exhausted. I also really wanted to think maybe about a second child, and then having a little bit of a break from breastfeeding before I became pregnant was something that I was quite keen on. And it just felt like it was starting to become the right time. So I started putting in gentle weaning strategies. At that point, it was things like boundaries around where we fed, how long we might be feeding for, started to reintroduce my partner at bedtime a little bit. He'd always put him to sleep in a different way. Obviously, he wasn't able to breastfeed, so we didn't try that. But we had maybe a few nights a week he would put him to sleep in his own way, which didn't involve breastfeeding. So I started to use him a little bit more to do a few extra nights so that I wasn't breastfeeding as much in the night. tried to kind of build all those things up. So eventually we were feeding less. And then I was a bit stuck. I didn't know what to do. So this is where the book was born from. And I started reading loads more about boundary setting and setting limits on breastfeeding and parenting styles. And these are all things that I've tried to build into the book, but these are also things that I have on my Instagram and in my gentle weaning guide as well. So a big change for Seb is basically a weaning story, but it is more than that. It's a narrative which I hope is relatable for children. And it's about them becoming more independent as well as wanting to be more independent. So I know sometimes people shy away from the idea of a child is getting big, and if you're getting big, then you don't have milk anymore because you're big and you don't need that. But actually, I found that my son really warmed to that idea. He wanted that independence. He wanted to feel big. So in the story, Seb is getting bigger. He's able to do more things. He's excited about being able to do more things. And eventually he realizes that he doesn't really need milk anymore because he is bigger and he's able to exist without it. It doesn't shy away from some of those more difficult emotions that children may feel when they're going through the weaning process, but it is really reassuring that you are always going to be there to comfort them, whatever happens, whether it's, with cuddles, just your presence, and hopefully that message comes through as well. I just wanted to add something about building a weaning toolkit, because I think it's really important to think about what breastfeeding is all about for an older child. And I think it's not just about nutrition, because they have many other ways of getting nutrition at that age. It is about connection. And sometimes for them, it is about control as well, because as I said before, if they're asking for something and they're wanting a feed and you give it to them, then that reinforces that controlling aspect of it. Not in a negative way, but it's just something that they can be, they rely on. It helps them to make sense of their world, perhaps at a time when they don't really have a lot of control over anything else. So because of that, you need to find ways to give them that connection, give them that sense of control without necessarily needing to feed them for them to feel that. So physical connection, attachment play, roughhousing, that kind of rough, really physical play, tickling, hide and seek, lots of energetic kind of tickling, cuddling, physical connection is really, really important when you're going through the weaning process. It's also a really good time to have really honest communication, but not to just talk to them, to try and really, really listen to what it is that they have to say. And if they're not particularly verbal yet, thinking about things like their body language, or just trying to communicate with them on their level about things. You can have things like time in. So it might be that you say, right, we're going to spend 20 minutes doing something that you want to do. And this is, again, this idea of control. Reversal of power can be quite useful. So telling them that they now have the power. We're going to do 20 minutes, whatever you want to do. Putting your phone away can be quite difficult. And just really spending that focused time with them. That can be really empowering because they've chosen the activity, they're making you do whatever it is that they want you to do. Yes, you do maybe have to wear that costume or do whatever it is. But as well, you need to think about how you can set loving limits. So it is okay to say no. And I found this really, really difficult when I was weaning because I'd been so used, and I think perhaps not to get really psychological about it, but I think the fact that he had been in intensive care as a baby also made me really focused on, not wanting him ever to cry, not wanting him ever to feel upset or in distress. I never did control crying or any of those things because I just wanted to be there for him all the time. But I think once we got to weaning, it was important to actually say no. I'm not doing that at the moment. This is my body and I don't want to do that. And I actually use that terminology at points. I'd say, no, my body doesn't feel like it wants to do that anymore, or it doesn't feel like it wants to do that right now. We can do that later, but I'm not doing that now. So this is a really great opportunity as well for you to teach things like consent, just at a very basic level, but just saying to him things like, my body, I don't want you to touch that now, or don't touch me there. That's something that they can understand, and they can really understand at that young age. So if you're struggling with boundary setting or setting limits, can be really difficult to do, I know. I do have loads of ideas for that on my Instagram as well, and in the Gentle Weaning Guide, because I think all of these strategies need to go alongside something like a picture book, because it's not just a solution on its own. Although maybe there are some unicorn children that it does work just like that. But I think for most of us, weaning is quite a long process, whereby we just have to try lots of different things and see what works. So I don't think you can see the little phrase there behind my face, but I've just put empower your child to connect with you in other ways. So again, you know your child best. Think about ways that they can connect with you physically, connect with you emotionally, in ways that don't involve breastfeeding, because that's really, really important to help them through this period. Okay, well, I think that might be it. So thank you very much for listening. I hope this has been useful. As I said, Instagram is @SebTheSeries. Please come in and join me on there. And I'm really open to direct messages or people that just want to chat about their own situation. I don't offer sort of, this is what you must do, but if you want to talk about it, if you want me to suggest things, I'm really happy to do that. And then the website, www.sebtheseries.com, is where you can purchase the book if you're interested. And because of this conference, I am offering a discount code on any purchase of the book. So if you use Beyond 10, you can get 10% off the book until the end of September. So again, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have an enjoyable rest of the conference.